Hello student, welcome to my YouTube channel Dhyani classes. If you're watching my video for the first time, do subscribe my channel, hit the bell icon so that you get notified whenever new video will be uploaded. So in today's video we will cover the first part of the chapter Albert Einstein at School, written by Patrick Pringle from class 11 CBSE. So let's get started. So Albert Einstein at School is written by Patrick Pringle. It is an extract from the Young Einstein. The author talks about the troubles Albert Einstein was facing when he was in school, as he did not like school because of the traditional method of teaching. So Albert Einstein is studying in a German school and having a conversation with his history teacher in his classroom. So let's understand the chapter with line by line explanation now. In what year, Einstein asked the history teacher, did the Prussians defeat the French at Waterloo? So here the author is describing a conversation between Albert Einstein and his history teacher, and the teacher asked him in what year did the Prussians defeat the French at Waterloo. So his history teacher asked him a question from history, that in which year Prussians defeated the French at the Battle of Waterloo, and telling Einstein that, why don't you know, you have been told it often enough. So his history teacher once again asked him, why don't you know? That means you must know the answer to the question. And then his history teacher became very angry with him that you don't know the answer, and says, you have been told it often enough. That means I have taught you many times the correct answer of the question, and says, I must have forgotten. So immediately Einstein replies that he must have forgotten the year because it's been long time and he never paid attention to dates and all, and says, did you ever try to learn? Asked Mr. Brown. So his history teacher named it Mr. Brown, and he told him that, did you ever try to learn the answer which you did not know? So his teacher became very angry with Einstein and says, no sir. Albert replied with his usual unthinking honesty. So Albert replies very honestly that no, I did not know the answer, and he answered the teacher very quickly because he did not want to tell the lies to his history teacher Mr. Brown. Further he says, why not? I can't see any point in learning dates. So again his history teacher told him, why not? That means you should know the answer to the question. And why is that you did not try to learn the dates? And then immediately Albert replies, I can't see any point in learning dates. That means Einstein believes that it is worthless or there is no use of learning or memorizing date, etc. And says one can always look them up in a book. So he feels that one always look up the dates in any book, so you don't have to learn anything by heart. So if you want to know the dates, it is easy. You can just take a book and learn. So according to Einstein, one can learn numbers and dates by just reading the book, and says it is not necessary to learn the dates. So this was Albert Einstein's idea on learning dates, and says Mr. Brown was speechless for a few moments. So his history teacher became very surprised and speechless for a few moments, and he never expected such an answer because Einstein replied to him, it is not necessary to learn dates because you can always open any book and find out the dates easily. And then his history teacher told him, you amaze me, Einstein, he said at last. So his history teacher became very surprised, and then he told him that you amaze me. That means he became very surprised, and he started looking at Einstein and says, don't you realize that one can always look most things up in books? So his teacher again asking a question, don't you know that anything and everything can be looked up in books? That means as per your opinion, there is no need to learn anything by heart, and it is not necessary to learn dates, and says that applies to all the facts you learn at school. So he is trying to tell him that okay, you don't have to learn anything because whatever you learn, especially the fact that you learn at school, can be looked up in any of the books. Yes sir. So immediately Einstein replied, yes sir, whatever I told you is absolutely right, and agree with his history teacher Mr. Brown, and says, then I suppose you don't see any point in learning facts. So after him, the teacher asked him, I feel that you believe that there is no point in learning and it is absolutely worthless understanding numbers and dates of the history, and there is no point in learning any kinds of facts because facts can always be looked up from any of the textbooks, and says, frankly sir, I don't, said Albert. So Albert immediately said, in my point of view, that he doesn't believe in learning facts because facts can be looked up in the textbook. That made his history teacher very surprised and amused, and then his history teacher asked him, then you don't believe in education at all. So his history teacher asked him his point of view on whether he believed in education, because he says there is no use in learning and you can always look into the textbooks, and says, oh yes sir, I do. I don't think learning facts is education. So Einstein replies, yes, I do believe that there is no use of learning facts because it can be looked up in the textbooks, and says, I don't think learning facts in education is education. That means he believes that facts always be found in the textbooks and believes that learning fact is not real education, and says, in that case, said the history teacher with heavy sarcasm, perhaps you will be so kind as to tell the class the Einstein theory of education. So whatever Einstein told, he became very angry and shout out loud with heavy sarcasm. That means showing some irritation on his face. And then his history teacher said, perhaps you will be so kind as to tell the class the Einstein theory of education. That means his teacher told him, I would like to know more about learning facts and tell the class the theory of education as per your own thoughts. Further he says Albert flushed. So here the author is saying that Albert flushed. That means he felt a little bit embarrassed because his teacher told him to explain the ideas and facts on education, and he felt that he was trapped in an awkward situation because he had to explain what his theory of education was, and says, I think it's not fact the matter but ideas, he said. So in reply, Einstein said it is not important to learn facts because facts can be looked up in any textbooks. But when it comes to ideas, it is very essential to learn all about the ideas on how things are, and says, I don't see the point in learning the dates of battles or even which of the army killed more men. So he is saying that in my opinion, it is not important to learn dates or event in history or which army or the country was victorious and all, and says it is more important to learn about the ideas instead of learning facts behind the history and its events, because it can be seen in any textbooks whenever one wants to know more about the dates, and says, I'd be more interested in learning why those soldiers were trying to kill each other. So here he says that he would not be interested in knowing the dates, but he would be more interested in learning why those soldiers were trying to kill each other. That means he would like to learn more about the war and why it had happened and why the certain things had happened in the past, instead of learning when it had happened and its dates. That's enough. Mr. Brown's eyes were cold and cruel. So his teacher became very angry with Einstein, and Mr. Brown's eyes were cold and cruel. That means he got very angry, and anger can be seen in his eyes because he did not like the way Einstein replied to him, and says, we don't want a lecture from you, Einstein. So the teacher was not happy with the reply and told Einstein that we don't want further lecture from you on learning facts or the meaning of your theory of education and all, and says, you will stay in for an extra period today, although I don't imagine it will do you much good. So the teacher became very angry with Einstein, and then he told him that you will stay in for an extra period today. That means he told Einstein that you will have to remain in the school for an extra period, and his teacher also told him that although I don't imagine it will do you much good. That means whatever Einstein told was not logical as per the history teacher, and said it may not do you any good by staying for an extra period today, and says it won't do the school any good either. So here the teacher also told him that it won't do the school any good either. That means staying an extra period in the school will not helpful for the school as well, because his teacher was very angry with him, and then his teacher says, you are a disgrace. So his teacher got very angry and said, you are a disgrace. That means you are the one who lost respect and value at all. And then his teacher says, I don't know why you continue to come. So his teacher also told him that I don't like such a children like you, and he was just thinking why this boy continued to come to the school, because he knew he was not interested in learning and he had his own theory about learning, and whatever he said is not correct about the method of teaching or learning dates according to his teacher. Further he says, it's not my wish sir, Albert pointed out. So immediately Albert pointed out, that means immediately he replied whatever his teacher was thinking about him on coming to the school, or you are disgrace and all. So he said, it's not my wish sir. That means even I don't like to come to the school, because as per Albert there is nothing much about learning dates and didn't like to come to the school. And then in reply his teacher says, then you are an ungrateful boy and ought to be ashamed of yourself. So his teacher, Mr. Brown, says you are an ungrateful boy. That means you are unappreciative or unthankful boy, and said you ought to be ashamed of yourself. That means you should feel ashamed that you are not interested in learning according to the teacher, and says I suggest you ask your father to take you away. So finally the teacher is telling him that tell your father to take you away from the school. That means instead of coming to the school, you should write a letter and leave the school permanently, because you are not interested what we are going to teach you. And later on, Albert felt miserable when he left school that afternoon. So Albert feels very sad and he was very disappointed because of the teacher when he left the school that afternoon, and says not that it had been a bad day. So he felt that the day was very bad day for him and the teacher ruined his day, and says most days were bad days now anyway. So he feels that it's okay if his day was bad, because most of the days are bad and not any good anymore, because he was not interested in learning the same thing every day or every single day in the class were not interesting at all, and says he was just coming to school, and says because he had to go back to the hateful place the next morning. So why he feels that every day is equally bad? Because next day he had to go to school, or he had to go to that hateful place. So why he feels that every day is equally bad? Because every next day he had to go to that hateful place. So here he is saying that school was a very hateful place for him, because he was not interested at all in learning and did not like to go to that school every single day. And then he feels very bad every day, and even he goes home, and then the next day he feels that he has to get up and go back to the same hateful place that was his school, and same learning methods he has to follow. So in thinking all about this, he feels that every day is a bad day because he hated that place. He only wished his father would take him away, but there was no point in even asking. So here he is saying that he only wished his father would take him away. That means he would be happier if his father take him away from the school, but there was no point in even asking. That means he knew that there is no use in asking, because he knew what the answer would be. He would have to stay until he had taken his diploma. So he knew if he asked this thing to his father, he would never agree, and knew what the answer would be, and says he would have to stay until he had taken his diploma. That means he thought he has to go to school every single day, because his father would never agree to take him away from the school, and would want him to complete his study from that school only, so that he can get the certificates. And says going back to his lodging did not cheer him up. That means he did not even like to go back to that place where he stayed. So lodging means place to live. Further, he says his father had so little money to spare that Albert had been found a room in one of the poorest quarters of Munich. So here his father was not so rich, so he had to find some place in Munich, especially those of the poorest quarters. That means it was a kind of slum area where he was looking for the room, and the lodgings was not good at all. So there were very few facilities there, and it was surrounded by dirt, and atmosphere was a kind of slum. And says he did not mind the bad food and lack of comfort, or even the dirt and squalor, but he hated the atmosphere of slum violence. That means he did not mind whether the food was bad, or even the lack of comfort, or even if the place was surrounded by dirt and squalor. So it was extremely dirt or negligence, but he hated the atmosphere of slum violence. So it was a slum area where he was living, and what he hated was most of the slum violence. That means how people fought with each other, and all the time they used to fight, that he could not tolerate at all. His landlady beat her children regularly, and every Saturday her husband came drunk and beat her. So the place where he was staying, the landlady always beating her children, and the landlady whose house he was staying, so that lady was always beating her children, and every Saturday her husband come drunk and beat her. So what happened here? Every weekend on Saturday, the husband would come and he would also be drunk, and he would beat up the lady, and there was always beating and violence around him. So who is the landlady here? Landlady is the owner of the house where he was living, and says, but at least you have a room of your own, which is more than I can say, said Yuri when he called round in the evening. So he had a friend called Yuri, and Yuri was always trying to console him. And what did he say? At least you have a room, which is more than what I can say. I don't have even a proper room to stay. So this is what his friend Yuri used to tell him. So who is Yuri here? Yuri is the only friend, and he was a medical student who was senior to him. So he used to always find all his friends, and his friend used to try to console him. And so he told him that at least you have a place to stay, but I don't have even that much. So this is what Yuri used to tell Albert when he called around in the evening, and says, at least you have living among civilized human beings, even if they are all poor students, said Albert. So here he is saying that Albert Einstein told him that okay, if you don't have your own place, at least you live among civilized human beings. So what do you mean by civilized human beings? That means people who knows how to live, or who knows how to live decently. That means living life without any fight or violence. And says even if they are all poor students, that means even if you stay among people, they may be poor, but they are all civilized. But when it comes to my condition, it is not like that. I always have to stay along with the slum violence. Further he says they are not all civilized, Yuri replied. So here Yuri says that they are not all civilized. That means the people with whom he was staying are very poor, and tells Albert that they are not really educated and they are also not civilized. That means they are morally not stronger, and their living standard is very poor and leading poor life. And then Albert asked him, did you not hear that one of them was killed last week in a duel? So he asked him about the people who were living there, and told that did you not hear that there was a person who already been killed because two people fought among themselves last week. So what do you mean by duel? That means he started telling him a story about the people there, and he told him that there was already one person killed because of the people fought among themselves. So duel means two people fighting between each other. And says, and what happens to be one who killed him? Nothing, of course, he is even proud of it. So here Albert wanted to know what happened to the person who killed him, or what happened to the person who found accused or guilty, and what punishment was given to him. And says nothing, of course. That means the person who killed the other man or other person was not punished at all. And says he is even proud of it. That means instead of punishing him, he was actually very proud whatever he did. And says his only worry is that the authorities have told him not to fight any more duels. So Albert got very angry and upset, and thought that the authorities must have told him not to fight any more duels. That means the authority must advise people not to fight against each other or with each other, and this is a very bad practice to feel proud of killing people. He is upset about this because he hasn't a single scars on his face to wear for the rest of his life as a badge of honor. So here he became very upset because the person who killed the other person was very proud, and the other person was very sad because there were no single scars or mark on the person's face, because the authority told him not to fight any more duels. And he is also upset because he doesn't have a single scars on his face or anywhere in his body, and says that the other person who was proud, who was very sad because he does not have even single scars on his face to show that he was very brave or he was able to kill person. So this was the atmosphere where Yuri was staying. And then, oh, exclaimed Albert. So Albert was not happy to hear the story because Yuri was living with some civilized people. But then he heard the story, he felt very bad that people feel proud of killing people, and says, and these are the students. So Albert exclaimed and calling these fellows as student, and says, these people are supposed to behave in a decent manner, but the people whom Yuri was staying with did not behave in that such a manner. People just killing and fought with each other, and feels proud in killing people as well. And then Yuri told Albert that, well, you will be a student one day, Yuri said. So immediately Albert said very sadly that he is not sure, and he doubts whether he will be a student because he does not like to go to the school. So he feels that he is not going to be a student anymore. So what do you mean by glumly? That means very sad. And says, I don't think I'll never pass the exam for the school diploma. So he says that he is not sure whether he will be able to pass the school examination and get the certificates. Further he says he told his cousin Elsa the same next time she came to Munich. So here Albert has a cousin sister, and she used to visit him where he was staying, and one day he told his sister everything when she came to Munich. So Albert was staying in Munich, and Munich is a city of Germany. So he told her the same thing, that he is not happy with the school and the method of teaching, and he is not sure whether he will pass the examinations, and says normally she lived in Berlin where her father had a business. So his cousin sister lived in Berlin. Berlin is also situated in Germany also. So her father was doing some kind of business there. So from Berlin she used to visit Munich to see how Albert is doing, and then her sister told him, I am sure you could learn enough to pass the exams, Albert, if you tried, she said. So here his sister Elsa told him, I am sure that you could learn enough to pass the exams. That means she suggested him to do hard work on your studies, and if you do try hard you can easily pass the examinations. So she was very supportive and always motivates him to do the best in his studies so that he can stay there and go to the school regularly, and says, I know a lot of boys who are much more stupid than you are, who get enough. So his sister Elsa also told him that she knew many boys who are very stupid and they are not able to learn properly, and they are also not able to pass the examination. So she was telling a story by giving him several examples in order to motivate him. So she just wanted to encourage Albert and wanted him to complete his school and pass the examination and get the diploma. They say you don't have to know anything, you don't have to understand what you are taught, just be able to repeat it in the exams. So here the author is saying that his sister Elsa was encouraging him and says, they say you don't have to know anything. That means she told him whatever teachers are teaching you, you don't have to bother about it, and don't worry about it whether you are able to memorize the whole lesson or not, and says you don't have to understand what you are taught. So she also told him that you don't have to understand what is taught in the school and just be able to repeat in the exams. That means whatever is taught in the school, learn it by heart with full concentration, and then you just have to repeat in the same thing in the examinations, and you will be able to pass the examinations. And says, that's the whole trouble, said Albert. So immediately Albert replied her that that's the whole trouble. That means it was very hard for him to learn things by heart, and that was the biggest trouble for him, and says he could not memorize or understand things by heart, and that was the impossible thing for him, and says, I'm no good at learning things by heart. So here he also told her that he is not good at learning things easily and could not able to concentrate on learning because teaching method is very different according to him, and that's why he was not able to learn properly, and says you don't need to be good at it, anyone can learn like a parrot, you just don't try. So again his sister Elsa told him you don't need to be good at it. That means you don't need to be good at learning or memorizing things, and anyone can learn like a parrot and you just don't try. So she also told him that learning things are easy, and if you just try it you will be able to do it just like a parrot, and how a parrot repeats whatever he said to it. So in the same time or in the same way he could also learn if he tries, and if he doesn't try he will not able to learn anything. So she motivated him, just try once and it will be easy for you to pass the examinations. Further he says, and yet I always see you with the book under your arm, added Elsa. So here his sister Elsa noticed something and said, I always see you with the book under your arm. That means she noticed that Albert always carries a book which he holds under his arm, and she was asking, why are you holding this book, and all about the book, and says, what is the one you are reading? So she wanted to know what book he was reading, and then Albert replied to her, a book on geology, rocks and things. Here Albert replied to her that it was a book on geology. That means a study of science which deals with physical structure and substance of the earth and its history and rocks, etc. So he used to read the book related to science and structure of the earth, and says, do you learn that? No, we have hardly any science at school. So his sister started asking, why do you learn? That means why are you carrying this book, and why are you reading this book, and do you have this subject in the school? And then Albert replied, no, I don't have any science subject in the school at all, and this subject is not taught at my school. And then immediately his sister asked him, then why are you studying it? Because I like it. So she became very surprised, and anxiously she asked him, why are you studying this subject if it is not your subject? And then Albert replied, because I like it. That means Albert had so much interest in learning science and all about the earth and its structure and rocks, etc. and says, isn't that a good enough reason? Elsa sighed. So he told Elsa that isn't that a good reason? That means it is sufficient reason for him to let her sister know that he is very much interested in learning science and history, and this is the only reason why I am reading this book, and there is no any good reason at all. So this is the end of the first part of the chapter. Let's look at the second part of the chapter in my next video. For more informative videos, do subscribe my channel, hit the bell icon so that you get notified whenever new video will be uploaded. So thank you so much for watching once again. Stay safe, stay healthy.